Great. Okay, yeah. Hello, I'm Julia Minamata. I am a solo indie game developer. I'm based in Toronto, and I launched and self-published The Crimson Diamond last August. It's a cozy mystery adventure game with a text parser interface. I developed everything except for the music, and it's my first game, so I had a lot of learning to do. This talk is going to cover a lot of ground, and I won't really be discussing anything in depth, but if you have questions at the end, I'll be around. So. All right. I did not start off as a game developer. Before that, I went to Sheridan College in Ontario and I got a Bachelor of Applied Arts Illustration. I specialized in magazines and newspapers, and some of my clients included the National Post, the Village Voice, and the New Yorker. But I was really struggling to get enough work to get my career off the ground. I had free time, so I started to look into pixel art. And these are my earliest pixel art attempts. I think the first pixel art I created was that portrait of Nancy Maple in the bottom left. But you can see there's one right beside that one. And I realized as I started to reduce the number of colors that were in the artwork, I liked it more. And when it came to creating this first room that you see, I naturally gravitated to this very particular 16 color palette, which I'll explain in a little bit. This particular room did not end up being in the Crimson Diamond, but it was kind of a good enough start for me to keep trying the style. And after I created the room, I did create that little character you see because I found like the furniture and doorways had some scale issues, and I wanted to create the character to make sure that I made things more consistent. But after I made the character, I ended up wanting her to do more things. I wanted her to be able to walk in the room, and I wanted her to be able to walk behind the furniture and walk between the rooms that I was creating because I was actually starting to create a series of these rooms. I was inspired by watching Let's Plays on YouTube of Francisco Gonzalez's Ben Jordan series and of Yatsuko Shaw's Chizo Mythos. I learned that they were using an engine called Adventure Game Studio. And it was really inspiring to me because here were people who were making these full-fledged, full-length adventure games completely on their own using this software. And they really did make it seem possible. And here are some examples of the style that I was looking to recreate. It's this very particular 16 color EGA palette from the late 80s and early 90s. These were my favorite types of games to play. And when I started to create my own pixel art and eventually my own game, I wanted to recreate the same feelings I had as a kid of just this wonderful comfort food of gaming. And I was able to start exploring game development because the technology and tools had advanced so much since the late 80s and early 90s. Graphics that once required state-of-the-art computers and development team working full-time, dozens of people on proprietary software could now be generated using older PCs on now what became user-friendly game engines that were actually free, stuff like Adventure Game Studio. And of course, now there was digital distribution, which meant anyone could make and share and sell their games. I really think that the 2010s was the perfect time for someone with my particular skill set to start making games. And here are some screenshots of the Crimson Diamond. The game is set in Northern Ontario in the late 1900s, 1914 to be exact. And most of the action happens inside the lodge, which is the collection of the setting my collection of rooms eventually evolved into. And I was clear from the start about the format and style of game I wanted to make. I wasn't really trying to innovate anything. I just wanted to refine what had come before using the subsequent decades of modern game design innovations to guide me. And that did save me time, but I still had a lot to learn. And I had to and to pull everything together. And here is an example of the gameplay. The player interacts with the game mostly by typing commands such as look at room, or talk to woman, and they can move around the room with the arrow keys or by pointing and clicking the mouse. And this is my favorite style of adventure game. This particular style was only popular for like a really brief moment before games moved on to these true point and click interfaces where all the actions, such as looking and talking, were performed clicking the mouse on hotspots in the room. And I really wanted to bring that text parser magic back. There are a lot of reasons why game developers are not really commercially releasing text parser adventure games much anymore. They're not going to play well on consoles because you do need a keyboard, and localization is expensive because there's a lot of words to translate. My game is about 160,000 words. And also, you got to think about the text parser when localizing. And adventure games are already a niche, and text parser games are a niche within that niche. but it's what I love, and I didn't really consider making any other type of game. Here are some inspirational books and media that I was looking at before and during making the game. I've always loved mystery stories. I get this from my mom. She has a shelf full of those like 70s era Agatha Christie paperback novels, the ones with those really trippy Tom Adams covers. And I was fascinated and terrified by them. From my dad came the general love of whatever computer games made it into the house via like the software pirating ring of office dads. They'd also like photocopy the manuals at work. I grew up in a Columbo household, and I am steeped in Nancy Drew, Hardy Boys, Encyclopedia Brown, and Usborne Puzzle Adventures. Of course, mystery adventure games were of particular interest to me. It should come as no surprise that I absolutely love The Colonel's Bequest and The Dagger of Amon-Ra, both by Sierra Online. Particularly The Colonel's Bequest was my primary inspiration for the Crimson Diamond in every aspect, from its EGA color palette to its text parser to the fact that it's a mystery story. Another huge source of inspiration for me was the Clue or Cluedo board game. That was a kind of inspiration for this type of rooms I'd want to put into the lodge, and particularly the conservatory, the study, and the billiards room. The image here at the bottom left is from the version of Clue that I grew up with, which is why my conservatory in the game has this yellow and green tiled floor, and all the windows and all those plants. I started to think about ideas for story for this setting that I was creating for myself, which required me to do some research. I was doing research about setting and what time period this place would be in, and I started to look into more Canadian history from the late 1800s and early 1900s, and also into mineralogy. And one of the most informative books I read was Ontario's Ghost Town Heritage by Ron Brown. It tells stories of many old towns from that very same era as Crimson, and it has photographs and it even has maps to their sites. I've always been fascinated by rocks and gems, so I knew that I wanted Crimson to be an old abandoned mining town. And this book provided many many histories of mining towns, and why they eventually faded into existence. This DK Smithsonian Rock and Gem book was also a valuable visual reference. It was a really good source of the different properties of minerals, and it also has a section for how to collect your own samples and the tools and techniques involved, which is something that the game does get a bit involved with. Mindat.org is a valuable online resource for finding photos of rocks and mineral samples, and photos of mines tagged by geographic location. And it does give a really detailed info about the history and geology of mined areas. And of course, Wikipedia, which is such a terrific resource. Please donate to Wikimedia to keep knowledge available for everyone. In a similar vein, the Canadian Encyclopedia Online is an excellent resource for Canadian history in particular. All this to say that research was a really big part of every aspect of the game. It's not just informing the setting, but also the art and the characters and their backstories. And I loved learning all about these things. And I really had to stop myself from doing more research because I needed to really get on with making the game. Speaking of making the game, let's talk about Adventure Game Studio. AGS is free. It's open source. It was initially released in 1997, and it continues to be maintained and updated by a really wonderful community. It's specifically made for adventure games, which is why it was perfect for me, because I didn't really have any coding knowledge to speak of when I started to work with AGS. But it does have a lot of those features already built in that you would need for an adventure game, such as like saving and loading, and it even has a text parser. But I'll get into that. I started learning AGS from Denzming's tutorials, which are still up on YouTube, and I found them to be very helpful. As I mentioned, the forums and the Discord for AGS are also wonderfully active to this day. And I would have been utterly stuck at times in development if I hadn't been able to get their help. There are a few considerations because it's such an old engine from '97. It doesn't make it easy to port to consoles. It's not like Unity where you can kind of push a button and port things to consoles more easily. It is possible. There are AGS developers who have done this. But if you're really concerned about having your game available on other consoles. Something like PowerQuest, which is a Unity plugin, that could be a good option. But as I mentioned, because my game is a text parser game, I wasn't really particularly concerned with console ports, and so it was not really a drawback for me. And yes, there is a text parser built into the Adventure Game Studio engine. Yahtzee Croshaw used it for his game Trilby's Notes, which is how I discovered it. And it's pretty easy to use. The most straightforward way to implement the code is a series of nested if-else statements. Of course, there are better ways, but as I mentioned, I'm kind of like a rookie programmer, and it was the most straightforward way for me to understand things. AGS does limit the number of nested if-else statements you can have, so finding a workaround was one of the earliest reasons why I needed to ask for help on the AGS forums. In this example, the words inside the square brackets are optional. The player can enter ask about lodge, or ask Margot about lodge, or ask person about lodge, or as you can see in the text parser dictionary, the house, cottage, and cabin also are synonyms for lodge. If the player enters a word that the text parser dictionary does not recognize, the game will display you can't use blank in this game. And as you can see, there's like in that bottom left, there's this text parser tab. And in AGS, it contains an easily editable word list. You can add words, you can add synonyms for words, and you can even search for words to see if you've added them already. It's a pretty easy system, and I would recommend, if you're interested in making a text parser traditional adventure game, to give AGS's text parser a try. The writing for the Crimson Diamond wasn't a conventional writing process. The pixel art was the starting point, and I needed visual reference for the furniture and textiles I was creating for these rooms. And that's where all that research came in. I developed each chapter in its entirety before moving on to the next one. And that was a process that kind of happened naturally as I was developing the first chapter of the game, which became kind of the demo of the game. And I just continued with that process for the rest of the game. I would complete chapter 2 in its entirety before moving on to chapter 3. And that means all the programming, all the writing, and all the art. And I do think for me, this was really helpful in writing the story because I had to commit to the writing in a chapter before moving on to the next chapter. And it helped me to minimize my own indecision and confusion about what was actually going to happen in the story. There are other benefits to working this way. I was not obligated to stick with one aspect of the game to focus on. If I didn't feel like coding one day, I could do art or I could do something else. A more typical game dev approach would have been to code the entire game from beginning to end using placeholder art and then replacing the placeholder art. And I think I would have gotten tired of working just on exclusively one aspect of the game for weeks or months at a time. I did not have a writing program. I didn't use anything like that to write drafts or to organize my thoughts or to write the dialogue. I wrote the dialogue in Engine. And this became a problem in later chapters as the story got more complicated. And also, because I was working on this game for like a really long time, I'd sometimes forget what I'd written before. But at least these inconsistencies were pretty easy to fix because I don't have voice acting in my game, so I didn't have to need to go back and get voice actors to re-record lines or anything like that. I just needed to quietly rewrite stuff as continuity errors were found. When the entire story was finished, I hired Indigenous cultural sensitivity consultant Sonia Valentine to help me with Nathan Cardinal's backstory and with the setting, and more on that really soon. Oh, you know what? It's just killing me right now because I just want to go back to AGS for 1 second. I don't know where my shoutouts went, but I want to give some shoutouts to some amazing people in the AGS community that helped me with this game. Lost Train Dude, Edmund Detour, Francisco Gonzalez, really dual names as well. So thank you to all, particularly those people who really, really helped. And I just wanted to, it was stuck in my mind. It just disappeared from my notes for some reason. Okay. Here's how I did organize the story for the Crimson Diamond. This is Adobe Illustrator, which is not really a writing program per se, but it was what I was using because I wanted to be able to shift these different colored paragraphs from different places. Each of these colored paragraphs tracks character actions throughout the game, and you can see there's some columns that are separating everything into scenes and acts, night and day. The game ended up being 7 chapters with absolutely no reference to scenes or acts. The story is pretty different also from what is actually seen here. I don't know if you can actually read any of this. I don't know if you'd even want to. But at some point, Kimmy was going to find diamonds in either the cormorant nest or the nesting box. She was going to be armed with bear repellent and a gun. There was going to be a bear in the game, and Margot and Evan were going to have a wedding, among many other things. I actually did not end up referring to this document very much once I actually started developing the game. And this is actually, I think, draft 11, if you can see on the upper left, if that's even legible. But so I did go through lots of drafts, but then I ended up not really looking at this. Um, yeah, I love doing research into every aspect of the game, and that included Nathan Cardinal, who is the Cree character in the game. But my research cannot replace the perspective and understanding of someone who is Cree, and specifically in Sonia's case, Swampy Cree. And her guidance really did make my game much better. And I was really nervous before meeting with Sonia for the first time. The last thing I wanted to do was offend her in any way with my representation of Nathan or the discussion of First Nations issues such as land rights and treaties. But Sonia was wonderful, and she immediately put me at ease, and she was just eager to help. An example of her help is originally Nathan wore a fringed jacket, beads, and moccasins, and Sonia told me this was a bit over the top and suggested that I change Nathan's boots in his graphic to be more European style boots to help depict the long history of trading between European settlers and the First Nations people. It's important to note that Sonia suggested this, and I thought it was a great idea. But if I didn't think that, it was really my call whether or not to change it. Because there seemed to be some miscommunication or misconceptions in some places about how cultural sensitivity consultation actually works. This is why I wanted to kind of share my experience and tell you that, yeah, I mean, it was kind of my call in all these aspects, but I was really happy to take on her suggestions because it really did help make my game better. Another example of this was in the story, a ranger arrives at the lodge and holds a meeting in the dining room. And originally, Nathan was going to be at that meeting. But Sonia told me that at that time in history, going off reservation without the permission of an Indian agent meant risking losing one's Indian status, which meant losing supports and benefits associated with that status, such as access to education and healthcare provided by the Canadian government. And sometimes First Nations people would choose to give up that status if they felt their livelihood would be better earned off reservation, and they could greater benefit their families that way. But it was not a decision that was made lightly. So I changed the dining room conversation in the meeting so that Nathan is not there. And the player can ask Nathan about that meeting after the fact, and he will explain his reasoning and a bit of that history. Um, this in turn actually made Nathan's decision to reveal himself later on in the game to the ranger in order to help his friend have even greater impact because he really did stand to lose so much. Um, I'm really grateful that Sonia worked with me, and I heartily recommend hiring a consultant to advise on characters and story ideas in your projects, particularly when you're depicting underrepresented or marginalized people, because the story and the characters are going to feel so much more real, and they will ring truer to the people who have had those lived experiences and those histories. And particularly, I'd like to thank for this section Jess Haskins, who gave an incredible talk at NarraScope 2019 called "World Building Out of Bounds," for inspiring me to seek out the cultural sensitivity consultation. I just want to go through a bit of the challenges specific to adventure games and how I tried to overcome them in the Crimson Diamond. Um, Adventure games are very story-based games. They're often quite linear, and players do want to feel like their choices matter, and that can mean having different outcomes depending on what their choices are. So I was really keen to address these aspects. And additionally, nowadays people are live streaming games, and this is great because they can be showing your game to like their audiences. But if their audience feels like they've seen everything there is to see in the game, then they might not be motivated to play it themselves. And one of the ways I really tried to address this was with branching storylines. But managing those permutations is a lot of work, and adventure games require a lot of bespoke art that doesn't often get reused. And if you branch the story too early, then that might mean you're creating a lot of assets that maybe not a lot of players are actually going to see if they don't end up replaying the game. What I did was I ended up branching this story for the Crimson Diamond like really late in the game. The game is 7 chapters. The branching happens in chapter 6, nearly at the very end. Actually, is it branched in chapter? No, you know what? It's branched in the very last chapter. I'm almost in one of the last scenes. Um, and a lot of the branching that actually does happen that kind of calls back to the player's choices, it happens in writing only. Most of the branching does. But there are two main endings. There's a good ending and a bad ending and a bonus ending, and those did require different assets. There are also there's optional storylines in the game. There is a main story path that the player does have to progress all the way through to get to an ending. But I wanted to introduce subplots to encourage players to explore more should they wish to. And originally, the main story was going to be investigating the murder of a character. because it is the most compelling storyline, but I deliberately relegated that to a side plot to encourage players to explore those other side plots. The Crimson Diamond also concludes with a debrief section where the player can either opt into it or not, and that will suggest to them further investigation into some of the aspects of the side plots that they may have missed. There are also multiple solutions for some of the puzzles, sometimes because I couldn't think of a reason why there shouldn't be a particular solution that a player might try, but also because it helps increase the chance that a player might solve a puzzle in the first place if there are more potential solutions for that puzzle. And of course, lastly, to help try to encourage replayability, I just tried to write the best story that I possibly could with compelling characters because people will reread favorite books and they'll rewatch favorite movies, and there's no reason why games can't be the same as that. There's a mystery in the Crimson Diamond, a few mysteries in fact, and the Crimson Diamond was the first story I'd written since high school and the first mystery story I ever wrote, and I was really concerned with having the player understand what was going on, but not making things too obvious, but also making things understandable and interesting. And my instinct was to simplify aspects of mystery stories and the characters for clarity. In criminal investigations, there are three indicators of suspicion: motive, means, and opportunity. And I didn't consciously consider these aspects when I was making the game. When I look back, I realized that I did simplify or even eliminate some of these aspects for how I approached writing the mystery story. In terms of motives, the characters in the Crimson Diamond are really simple. They don't lie, they have easily understood motivations, and there's no real surprises in their personalities. They are very much as they seem. Related to this, once the crimes start happening, the means of those crimes, how they're perpetrated, are pretty unambiguous once evidence has been discovered. There's no like red herrings or there's no other possible alternatives that the player is evaluating and then discarding as a theory of how things were actually committed. There's a challenge in trying to be comprehensive about collecting and presenting evidence at the end of the game, but it is not required to do this perfectly to get a good ending. And in fact, what I tried to do in the game design was no matter how the player actually did in terms of finding subplots or investigating fully, it really kind of boils down to a yes or no question that the professor asks you at the end. And if you say answer that question a particular way, then you'll get the good ending. And if you answer it the other way, then you get the bad ending for the most part, broadly speaking. And there is a bonus ending in the game that does require a bit more detective work, but it doesn't require the play to be perfect. But I will say, out of the three indicators of suspicion, means is the one that the Crimson Diamond emphasizes. And a lot of the choices that the player makes in the game are kind of borne out in the character epilogues at the very end of the game. And that's kind of what I mean, where the writing was where a lot of those, the branching and the choices get more displayed versus having entire cinematic sequences. Opportunity, we're talking about motive, means, and opportunity. Opportunity isn't really addressed at all because the setting of the game is this one single location. It's like this lodge and the surrounding areas. And everyone is around those locations, which means everyone has the same basic amount of opportunity. Alibis are a mainstay of crime fiction and criminal investigation, and picking apart a suspect's alibi can be a really exciting prospect. Maybe that's something I will include in the sequel. There are some ways I try to design the Crimson Diamond to help players understand broadly what the story is and what their goals are. And for this, I took a cue from Terrible Toy Box's adventure game, Thimbleweed Park. And it has an in-game notebook, and that's why I decided to include an in-game notebook in my game. This one tracks progress and lists objectives. It also records short notes about information the player might have overheard or observations that they've made. And certain notes in the notebook, the top note in this example, are surrounded by asterisks. And these are the game progression actions. The player is free to do anything else, explore to their heart's content, and not worry about accidentally progressing the game, which was really important to me. There is also a parser command that you can enter in called review, which Nancy will kind of tell you what your top level objectives are. There's also an opportunity near the end of the game to be privy to Nancy's introspective thoughts. If you do opt into that, she will like list a number of things that you might have wanted to take a look into. And there are also two quiz sections in the very last chapter that will also get you to gauge how well you've gotten to understand the story. There is a hyperlink also in the main menu that opens up to a hint book, a universal hint system style hint book in your browser. and I really wanted players to have a positive experience with the Crimson Diamond. And that includes helping them to reach the end of the game. This is a text parser game, and it might be the first text parser game a lot of people are playing, and I really didn't want that to be a barrier to enjoyment. Because I do realize there is a degree of challenge inherent to a text parser that, yes, people might not have experienced before. And here are a few things I did that I found incredibly helpful in terms of building connections in community and getting the word out about my game. I was marketing my game for more than 6 years. That includes a monthly newsletter, regular social media posts, and streaming on Twitch. Sometimes people ask me why I marketed my game for that long, and it's because I didn't know how long the game would take to finish. But consistently marketing for that long actually worked in my favor because it meant I was able to really build that audience and that community of people who were excited to see the game when it launched. Feedback was really a great way to connect with people as well, particularly because I'm a solo game developer for the most part. I needed fresh eyes on the game, and when people see that you're taking in their suggestions and responding to them and making the game better, then everybody kind of wins. Um, Attending events is also a really great way to connect with people. It was super motivating to see people actually sitting in front of my game and playing it. That happened for the first time in November 2018 when I had the demo and I showed it at a narrative showcase here in Toronto called Wordplay. Events are also really great for just meeting other developers. And that culminated in me actually getting to meet Roberta Williams herself, the designer of the Colonel's Bequest, at Adventure Game Hotspot's Fanfare in 2024. And sharing knowledge is also a really great way to build connections. I recorded my own YouTube tutorial video for Adventure Game Studio, and I put that up on my YouTube channel. And what happened was it actually became the most viewed video on my channel, and it's actually been a great way for people to learn about the Crimson Diamond because people who are interested in making adventure games often are the same people who are interested in playing them. Twitch, as I mentioned, I've been streaming on Twitch, and it's been a really unexpected way to connect with people and to create community. I've been streaming for more than 5 years by now, and it was Dan's idea. And Dan Pollicar is the composer for the Crimson Diamond. We started streaming during COVID lockdowns because Dan's day job is touring the world as part of Sean Paul's band. And in 2020, they weren't doing a lot of touring. And Dan suggested we stream our collaboration for the soundtrack on Twitch. And it was really great because I was able to give him instant feedback, and we could also even get input from chat. This was the start of Crimson Tuesdays. Tuesdays on 8 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. I am _Maple Mystery, and I would encourage you to join us. Dan is incredible composer. He did incredible work for the Crimson Diamond. He's also worked with Brenda and John Romero, making music for their game Empire of Sin. He's also currently working with Laurie and Corey Cole on their upcoming game Efeo's Adventure. And if you have a game project that you want music for, you should contact him. He's at dantheband.com. And Twitch has also been a great way for me to find streamers who are interested in playing my game. Because my game has a very retro look, a lot of the retro community in Twitch has been super welcoming. And some of them I've even met in person and I've made real friends. So altogether, Twitch has been a super, super win for me. I mentioned I was marketing the game for more than 6 years. I was working on the game for even longer than that. Most of the time part-time and as a hobby, but contract work did help sustain me. And these are some of the projects I actually got to work on because I was marketing my game and sharing it publicly. I got connected with other game developers. People such as Oliver Nelson Jr. in 2020. I started working with him on Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator. And we ended up working on a bunch of other things together, including Witch Strandings and a playdate game called Recommendation Dog. I also worked on some EGA portraits for Limited Run Games' 30th anniversary Monkey Island anthology, including this portrait of Ron Gilbert, which I just love. It's one of my favorite ones. And the fact that he's such a game dev hero of mine and I got to do this was really a dream come true. And my next upcoming project is Chance's Lucky Escape, which is in Playdate Season 2 games and it'll be coming out soon. On August 15, 2024, I finally launched the Crimson Diamond. It's had a very positive reception so far. It's got more than 500 reviews on Steam. It is 97% overwhelmingly positive, Metacritic score of 88. It was reviewed favorably by Kotaku, Polygon, and Rock Paper Shotgun. There was a blurb now on Steam, on the Steam store page from Roberta Williams herself. And I'm incredibly relieved and grateful that that it's all gone down this way. It was a really long journey to get here, and thank you for letting me share my story with you. Thank you.
Hey, so are you still here?
Yes.
Yeah, so we can open this stage to the audience for any questions. Is anyone want to? You have to come up here for the mic. If anyone wants to raise their hand and come up with any questions, we could take that. Come on up. Yeah.
Is the mic on work?
Yes. This one right here.
Just sort of where I aim. But hi, I have a question about when you are developing a text parser game and you are building that library of acceptable words that will prompt the next action. Is that something you're doing by yourself? Is that something you're testing with players as you go? How do you feel, or when do you feel, I guess, like you found the complete library of words that you want to support?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Most of the time I was developing it just kind of on my own at home. But I will say that some of the most helpful feedback I've gotten was, yeah, watching Twitch streamers play the game, because a lot of them are not from based in Toronto, Canada, but a lot of them are all over the world. So people have like different ways of saying stuff or different words for the same like item or the same noun. And that's been super educational in terms of like what words I need to add, as well as like watching people at events playing the game and seeing what words they're trying out. There's actually, it's kind of hidden, but there actually is a text parser log in the game that is, it's toggled off by default. But if you turn it on, it's buried in the menu somewhere. But if you turn it on and you kind of are trying words, and they're not recognized by the text parser, then the game saves them to like a little text document that you can then you can email me if you want. But not really many people have sent me any text parser logs because it's all very hidden in the menus. But that's something I was thinking about in terms of how to have build a really good vocabulary for the engine.
Any other questions? Okay, and does anyone in the Discord have any questions that they would like to ask? Mm, Okay, I guess not. Okay, thank you so much. I think we're right on time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you guys for coming.